Not even close to 2 weeks in, and we've got a topsy-turvy situation in the Big Ten. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking down the game we love. Best discussion, debate, and analysis on a daily basis. Please like the video, whether you agree with my analysis or not. If you believe in what we do here in delivering content for you, the college football fan, please hit the like button. And, of course, comment below your thoughts on Michigan, Michigan State, and the Big Ten and the nation. Share the videos on social media, and, of course, subscribe. That way you know when we're going live, when you hit that bell for the notifications. And we go live just about every day, many times, multiple times per day. Michigan State pulls the stunner in Ann Arbor, 27-24, as a 22-point underdog. New Michigan State head coach Mel Tucker had said going into the game that he felt confident. He likes his team. He liked the performance. Yes, against Rutgers, losing by 11 points, giving up 38 points. He liked the effort. He liked what he saw. And I guess if you would take away, which is impossible to do, the 7 turnovers. And I like to analyze the turnovers. Anytime there are turnovers, were those forced errors, forced turnovers by good defensive play, strip sacks, interceptions where the defensive back broke on the football, those types of plays, or were they unforced errors, just gifts to the defense? A missed exchange at the mesh point between quarterback and running back, or a tipped, deflected ball that just lands in a cornerback or defensive back's hands, or just an overthrow that where a safety's 25 yards behind the play and it just comes right to him. A little bit of both in analyzing Michigan State and Rutgers, watching the game last week, a little bit of both. So 7 turnovers for Michigan State. No football team's going to keep up that pace. Rocky Lombardi, I thought there was an issue here when he won the job in a 3-way battle for the Michigan State quarterback job. I thought, okay, this is a telling sign of how bad Michigan State has fallen. Because in 16 games and 3 starts, Lombardi, 43% passer, had not looked the part of a Big Ten starting quarterback. But he's looked rather good in 2 weeks, even against Rutgers in throwing 2 picks, 3 touchdown passes, 319 yards through the air. Against Michigan, it's a big play. It's become a big play offense at Michigan State. This is not the Michigan State of the first half of Mark D'Antonio's tenure, where they ran the ball, wanted to throw it 20 times, and lived on the big running game. No, they're hitting teams up with big plays, and they can't run the ball much. 17 of 32, so barely over 50%, but chunk plays, 323 yards through the air, 3 touchdowns, and this week, no interceptions against that Michigan secondary that looked good against Minnesota with Rashad Bateman and Chris Ottman-Bell. They looked good in containing that Minnesota offense with 5 offensive line starters back in Tanner Morgan as the second-best quarterback in the Big Ten, most likely, coming back. But this week, not so much. Pass interference and holds on Michigan all over the place. Were they questionable calls? Maybe to an extent. I wouldn't say that they were questionable calls. I would say that the officials called it close. But they weren't rip-off calls by any stretch. Michigan's defensive backs, their young defensive backs, could not keep up with Michigan State's wide receivers. That was a big mismatch in the game. Most notably, Ricky White. I wanted to look up his recruiting numbers coming out of high school. I failed to do that. Wanted to look up the 247 Sports Composite. We'll get to that. He only had 1 catch against Rutgers, 5 yards. He's a true freshman. 8 catches for 196. And beyond the numbers, the plays he made on the ball. He had a catch up the right sideline in which he was held the last 5 yards of the route, and he stretched out, made a great catch. 8 for 196 for Ricky White. So he's a guy, number 7, Michigan State, we're going to keep our eye on. Again, Michigan State's run game, it was serviceable in this one. They only gained about 1.5 yards per carry against Rutgers. Awful. Jordan Simmons had 14 carries for 55 yards. It was serviceable. They at least started to move the Michigan defense a little bit in the second half. Elijah Collins, the leading rusher on the team, and I believe the leading rusher coming back, not necessarily with Stevie Scott at Indiana, but at least the Michigan State leading rusher from 2019, has been surpassed by a number of running backs at Michigan State. He only had one carry, but Jordan Simmons appears to be the most dynamic back, and I use that term in a relative sense against the other Michigan State backs. This is not a good traditional running team now in terms of traditional running between the tackles, the interior of the offensive line getting a consistent push, opening up creases and lanes, not happening for Michigan State. On the defensive side, yes, they gave up 38 points to Rutgers, but only about 200 yards of total offense after the first drive. So it was a lot of the turnovers putting them in bad places for Michigan State. They didn't really give up 38 points defensively. Their senior, number 34, Antoine Simmons, is a monster. He's just a smart player, makes the plays, makes the tackles. Probably the best defensive player they have from Ann Arbor, by the way. And again, Mel Tucker likes this team, and people tell me he can recruit, so we shall see. They looked like Michigan State's defense looked like it was going to be outflanked by this Michigan speed that we're hearing about that we saw on display against Minnesota. Well, we'll get to the Michigan side of this in just a second. We've got to reevaluate these teams each week. So Michigan looks great in taking on a team that finished in the top 10 last year that lost a lot of personnel. Minnesota did on defense, but had the entire offense pretty much come back. Best running back, quarterback, two best wide receivers, entire offensive line. So Michigan fans were excited, and I understand the excitement coming off the Minnesota win. They only gave up 17 points on defense. But now we see Minnesota go to Maryland and struggle against a team that was horrible the week before against Northwestern. So again, we reevaluate each week, and now Michigan comes back down to earth. Joe Milton, I made the comment, put it in my notes, that through 6 quarters of play, meaning the full game and the first half of this game, I hadn't seen him throw a bad pass. He had thrown incompletions, but not made a poor decision, number one, not thrown a horrible pass. Then he started in the fourth quarter. The Michigan wideouts were not gaining separation. The Michigan State defensive backs were tight in coverage. And he suffered some drops in the passing game as well. 32 of 51 for 300 yards. So Michigan should not be throwing the ball 51 times. That's not their game, shouldn't be their game with the 4 backs that they have in the backfield. And that was another distinction we made from Michigan football on offense in 2019 versus the Michigan offense of what we saw in the first game against Minnesota. They came into 2019 thin at running back, very inexperienced, with Hassan Haskins and Zach Charbonnet putting in serviceable work in 2019. Haskins, 5+ yards per carry. Charbonnet, 4.9, 11 touchdowns. And then they add the decorated running back out of high school, Blake Corum, get Chris Evans back, that they were set at running back, and the offensive line looked good, again, against Minnesota in week 1. Gophers turn around and give up 250 yards rushing, something in that range, to the Maryland ground game and Funk in particular. Michigan couldn't run it much in this one. Hassan Haskins looked the best, 8 carries, 56 yards, but Blake Corum got it 5 times for 15. Chris Evans, 3 for 10. Zach Charbonnet, who scored the 11 touchdowns last year, 5 carries for 3 yards. So they're distributing the football. They haven't settled on one guy being the main guy. So we'll see if they're trying to find that main guy or they want to go by committee the entire season. But it didn't work against Michigan State after 8.2 yards per carry against Minnesota. Young receivers seem to be stepping up, replacing the Ronnie Bells and the guys that have been there. Of course, Nico Collins has moved on, and Tariq Black is in Texas. A.J. Henning only had 2 touches, but look out for him. He was very impressive with those 2 touches, the true freshman. Giles Jackson probably emerging as the number 1 threat eventually. Michigan did not stretch the field. They had a couple 20-plus yard plays in the passing game, but unlike Michigan State, they didn't stretch the field. 32 completions, 300 yards. That's 9 yards per completion. The Michigan defense, not impressive necessarily, not torched. On the other hand, 449 yards of total offense given up by Michigan State in chunk plays. So the corners are struggling. The secondary struggled in this one. Michigan State's offensive line, for as much as they didn't move the Michigan defensive front, and you wouldn't expect them in the ground game because Michigan's defensive front is loaded. But in pass protection, they were solid enough to give those receivers time to get downfield for those chunk plays. And Michigan's secondary, with all the holds and the pass interference calls, whether you agreed with them or not, will need to adjust if they run into officiating crews like this one. Michigan drops this one to Michigan State, 27-24. Would love to hear what you have to say about either team, the Big Ten or the nation. Of course, we engage with you here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, and we will see you soon.